right. I am Tom. I'm with Sentai's theatrical and marketing departments, and today we're here to talk about Lone Wolf and Cub. And we have two very special guests. Mr. Collins, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Max Allan Collins. I'm a mystery writer and sometimes comics, graphic novel writer, and sometimes screenwriter, and whatever they'll pay me for. And the thing that brings me here is the connections between uh, Asian cinema and specifically some Asian manga in terms of the graphic novel I wrote called Road to Perdition, which was illustrated by Richard Piers Rayner and is sometimes described as an American version of Lone Wolf and Cub.
Okay, great. And Mr. Travis, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Ed Travis. I'm a film critic, editor in chief at a website called Synapse with a CIN. And just a huge Lone Wolf and Cub fan for many years. So I'm just kind of the fan here, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much for joining, both of you. I guess our first questions for both of you. When did you first become familiar with Lone Wolf and Cub, and just what impact did it have on you?
I came to it in a somewhat roundabout way. My son, who was Nathan, who was actually now today is an English, as a Japanese to English translator. He grew up so fascinated with Japanese pop culture that it became his profession. He's actually the translator on JoJo right now. But he and I watched a lot of Asian stuff, and he was much younger than he should have been. I mean, we're talking about 7, 8, 9 years old. So please, social services, I think we're past the window where you could prosecute me. And the first exposure I had actually was to a movie called Heroes Shed No Tears, which is a John Woo movie. And it's the last John Woo movie that he made before that whole run of spectacular crime movies like The Killer and Better Tomorrow and all of the stuff that really brought, in particular, the Hong Kong cinema forward among a lot of the fans. And in those days, this is late '80s. It was all kind of being passed around on VHS, very gray market or no market at all, just swapping. And people would go to a Chinatown to buy the VHS. This was all VHS. This goes way back. Well, Hero Shed No Tears was a Vietnam War movie, but it was basically Lone Wolf and Cub. It was a mercenary and his kid who were caught up in all of that action. And it actually has several scenes that appeared in the later Lone Wolf and Cub movies and in the manga that they just did. I mean, they just did these. Now, I didn't know this. I didn't know that's what was being, we'll call it referenced, to be generous in the terminology. And then I don't remember whether it was when First Comics began publishing the manga, which was again in the late '80s, or whether I think I stumbled onto Shogun Assassin, which is the film that put two of the movies together, two of the Japanese movies together, and had a voiceover. It was actually quite good. It was the voiceover of the child, and it had music by Mark Lindsay of Paul Revere and the Raiders. Okay, is that enough pop culture references for you? And was very popular, particularly in the video stores. They followed up with doing, I think was the third movie. There were 6. Am I not right, Ed? There were 6.
The Lone Wolf and Cub.
Of those movies. And so that exposed it through the video stores. And then I also saw a Laserdisc called Fugitive Samurai, which was episodes of the TV show that you guys stream, again, cobbled together to be a quote-unquote movie. So I saw all of this Asian cinema stuff, and was watching a lot of a lot of Asian stuff before I actually was exposed to the manga. And the manga by Kazu Koike and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Koseki Kojima. That is one of the most brilliant, longest graphic novels ever done. Enormously long, many volumes, an epic, and brilliant, just brilliant. And that's what those 6 movies were taken from. And eventually we saw, my son and I, my much too young for the material son and I, watched all 6 of those and just loved them. And so that was my, so in this roundabout way, I kind of view it as this period in the late 80s when, maybe sparked by the video game invasion, that a lot of this Japanese pop culture started to really enter and bleed into to what was going to be my son's generation, really. And again, this would have been, I'm going to say, around 86, 87, 88.
Okay. And what about you, Ed? When did you first start?
Well, my primary takeaway from Mr. Collins' comments is that I'll be showing my 6-year-old daughter the Lone Wolf and Cub movies as soon as possible.
No, the other ladies, what is it, Lady Snowflower? What is the
Lady
other?
Snowblood, yeah.
Yeah, no, let's show her
Talk with
the
those.
gender appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Advice taken. And actually, before I dive into my introduction, I'll also note that that film Heroes Shed No Tears, the John Woo film, got a Blu-ray release like just last year. I think it's on Film Movement, and I watched the whole movie within the last year or so, and never caught a Lone from Cub reference, and you kind of blew my mind with that a little bit. So I'm gonna have to go back and watch it again, and like through that lens, watch it through that lens. I think I mostly watched it through the lens of like John Woo movies, and so
Sure.
yeah. But I think I was thinking about this, and I really discovered the Lone Wolf and Cub movies in the sort of Netflix disc era. That was when Netflix had this, enormous disc catalog, and that was probably the early 2000s when I really used the Netflix disc catalog as a way to expand my own cinematic horizons, and just took chances on things, because it was the first time that I could take a chance on titles without paying for them individually. Like I used to have to go to the video store and rent X movie, and you're putting money down on a certain film, and you're going, I hope this is good. But with the Netflix disc plan, it was like, watch as many movies as you possibly can, in a month, because you're paying one flat rate. And so titles, like crazy titles, would stand out to me. And so these crazy titles of the Lone Wolf and Cub movies, where I was like, baby cart, and the river Styx, like what, and so that's kind of how I think I just kind of mainlined all 6 of the original movies just on DVD in those early 2000s. And that's kind of how my love affair started.
Gotcha. Well, I guess out of all of the iterations of the series, Mr. Travis, what's your favorite? The manga, films, television series?
Yeah, well, I'm a film guy. I'm a film critic and film fan, and so the movies have been my primary kind of exposure. I I mean, you mentioned how long the manga is. I've decided it's probably time to dig in, and so I've read volume 1 of, which is 700 pages, just the omnibus one from, I guess, the Dark Horse comics, and I've got a couple of the next volumes sitting here, and I can't afford to buy those things. I'm checking them out from the local Austin library, which is amazing that they have them, and I can kind of work my way through that way. And the show, was it was never been available through legal means that I've been aware of in my fandom. So I'm actually pretty excited to know that your service, it's High Dive, has the show available now. It's going to be interesting for me to get exposed to that.
For sure. And What about you, Mr. Collins? Your favorite iteration of the series?
That's really tough because I consider the manga to be really right up there with, I mean, it's easily in the top five or so of anything I've ever seen in the comics graphic novel format. And the epic nature of it um, is just remarkable. The artwork's great too. But the movies are extremely faithful, and the writer of the strip of the manga was writing the movies too. So you don't have that usual well, which is better, the movie or the or the book. Well, you watch those movies and they just come. It's the manga come to life. Now, of course, if you read the manga second, it's a little it's a little weird, but I just think the movie is remarkable, and I'm a movie guy too to that degree, and to see them come to life the way they do, and it's so beautifully cast. Um, it's so I might edge the movies over the manga, but it's really close, and it might just depend on my mood on a given day.
That makes sense too. Uh, I guess, Mr. Collins, this question is for you. That you've said in an interview that your Road to Perdition series is an unabashed homage to Lone Wolf and Cub. Just
Yeah.
what a Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean that that's a bit of hyperbole because the and I think it's become kind of you know an almost myth that Road to Perdition is just a a an American version of Lone Wolf and Cub, because there's many differences and there's many other factors. It One of the things I said when I saw the film, people would say to me, "Well, because there are some differences between them, because mine is very episodic and the movie isn't as episodic as what I wrote," and I will say, "Well, I was trying to write a John Woo movie, and they made The Godfather, and that's fine. I mean, because The Godfather's cool. What am I going to say? No, don't make a classy gangster movie out of my material." But I was so imbued with a lot of the movies, in particular the movies. And if you go to the graphic novel, it's much more violent than the film, and there's even a sliding down the banister, shooting guns with both hands, which is my little wink at John Woo. So I would just say I didn't. If I stole from Road to Perdition, I didn't just steal from Road to Perdition. I stole from a bunch of guys, and so it was meant to be kind of on some level an homage to that area of Asian filmmaking. And when I was working on that, I wasn't as familiar with the manga, but I really feel like it's a little exaggerated sometimes that it's just, well, this is the American road to Perdition, because a couple of things. If I can tell this story real quickly, I used to be the writer of the Dick Tracy comic strip, and I wrote it for 15 years. And I had taken over for the guy who created it, Chester Gould, the guy who created it in 1931. In 1977, I took it over. I was hired to do it, and I wrote it for 15 years. Then I alienated the new editor and got fired. They never didn't say I was fired. I always like to say, well, all I know is when I went to work, somebody else was doing my job. That's all I can say. So apparently, I was fired. So anyway, I didn't have a gig, and I went to a comics convention, and an editor from DC sat down with me and said, "We're going to do some noir graphic novels. Would you like to do one?" Of course, yeah, please. And I pitched off the top of my head Road to Perdition, and it was a bunch of these things kind of slammed together. There was at the core, there was this notion that the samurai who is the executioner of say the shogun, which isn't exactly right, but that's kind of how it was played in American translation. Isn't that unlike an enforcer for a mob boss, for a Godfather. So I thought that was a good transition into into American pop culture and the American myth of gangster films. But two other things were very important. One was I didn't do a baby. I did an adolescent. I had an adolescent son who I mentioned, the one who I ruined by showing him Lone Wolf and Cub, and so I was writing about an adolescent, a guy, it was a coming of age story on some level, or coming of age, and that was there. And then I had also been researching for my historical novels a guy named John Looney, who was the godfather of Rock Island, Illinois. I live near the Quad Cities, Iowa, Illinois, Quad Cities. He was the godfather, and he had a crazy son uh, named Connor Looney, who they called Crazy Connor, who apparently the name Looney wasn't enough. They had to add crazy to it. But he's the guy that Daniel Craig played in the film. And so I transferred all the stuff about Looney and his son into this mix. So while Road to Perdition has a debt it owes to obviously a debt it owes to Lone Wolf and Cub, there are some other elements, which is how I really think a lot of storytelling works. I think we are all standing on somebody else's shoulders. That's the way it works. And they're standing on somebody else's shoulders, and it goes on down. So you are correct that I said that it was unabashed. Should have been abashed. But interestingly, we were at the. I'm going to tell you a story I've never told anyone.
Okay.
We were at the San Diego Comic-Con, and Mr. Koike, the creator, was there, and he, in an interview, they how at the cons you line up and get to ask a question sometimes after the panel, and someone asked him how he felt about some of the movies that had drawn upon Lone Wolf and Cub, and he just said, apparently he said through a translator, "I just wish they would thank me." Well, my son was with me, and he speaks Japanese. So he went up to the line, and he said directly to him, "This is my father who wrote Road to Perdition. He's a big fan. He wants to thank you." And I don't know what that did in the Japanese culture, but apparently, he did not know how to process it. But I'll tell you this, he shook my hand. So that meant a lot. So anyway, that's that.
Wow, but that's fantastic, though. Yeah, but I'm glad you could, clear the air for us in the interview. I mean, it is, a debt to many other influences, not just Lone Wolf and Cub.
Well, remember too, if I had the other way Lone Wolf and Cub impacts, if I hadn't exposed my 7 or 8-year-old son to Lone Wolf and Cub, he wouldn't have been able to speak Japanese that day, would he? Because he wouldn't have gotten fascinated with Japanese, because he lived in Japan for 2 years. So anyway, it's been a big part of our lives, and and my son is a wonderful writer and a remarkable translator. So I'm very proud of him. He did my son Nathan translated the most recent edition of Battle Royale, which is pretty heavy duty stuff.
So, Mr. Travis, a question for you. In a review on your site, Synapse, you've said all 6 films add up to one of the silver screen's grandest epic tales, which is a pretty bold claim. So what did you find so intriguing about Lone Wolf and Cub?
Yeah, I feel like my initial answer would be pretty base and primal, which is just that I just thought it was the coolest thing. It was so cool. And really through rewatches and reading about it, and catching all these like cultural references that have been made to it since it came out. Like I've begun to unpack some of the depth, but probably I think it was around the same time that I first saw the movies that Kill Bill was coming out. And of course, there's, Uma Thurman's character is watching Shogun Assassin and showing her much too young child Shogun Assassin on TV. Um, and so I think there was just that was, I mean, man, this is, Quentin Tarantino's out there making Kill Bill and taking all these references and things that he loves and mixing it into this kind of, I think Kill Bill's pretty masterful as well. And so there was just a cool factor to it that I just had never seen anything like that at the time. And I had seen, John Woo films and things like that, but I don't know that I had seen the, yeah, geysers of blood spurting, type of stuff. And I think maybe Ogami Ito as a character, which we haven't really gotten into yet, he's just so stoic, like throughout these increasingly like ridiculous situations in the movie. In the film series, like as the 6 movies go on, like the armies that he faces off against just kind of get bigger. And each movie, it's like at the end of the first movie, he's fighting like 50 guys at once, and you're going, oh well, how could he ever get out of this? And then by the last movie, he's fighting like 500 guys all at once, and so they're just ridiculous. But the stoicism of the lead character, like throughout it, and the sort of like dignity and honor that is like relentless in his character, as what I often say, like almost Roger Moore level, like Bond era, like Roger Moore era Bond ridiculousness is kind of going on around him, with like machine guns popping out of his his baby cart and things like that. But he's just so stoic and cool, and so truly it was a cool factor initially. And I'm sure we'll get into some of the like historicity of it and how accurate it and how deeply researched it is, and those kinds of things. But my fandom came first in terms of just being blown away by the violence and the crazy, enormous, escalating confrontations, and maybe even also the sort of episodic nature of it. Like he there's this, through the movies, there's this big overarching story of this clan that's trying to end his life and that he's like fighting against. But then there's just all these kind of adventures that remind me of like the Zatoichi films, or like even like the Incredible Hulk TV show that I grew up watching, where he just kind of wanders from town to town and gets in these little mini adventures. I love those dual, these, each film has like 3 or 4 sometimes little adventures, side quests almost, that he goes on, and then there's this overarching, shadow clan thing going on. And I love all that stuff. I just eat it up. And so yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up the main character. We need to talk about him too. He is, an assassin for hire, but he's also a loving father, and involving his son in all these crazy combat situations. Like, I guess this question is for both of you. And in your opinion, does this make just for great fiction, or is the mangaka making some kind of point using this plot element with the son?
One of the most disturbing and poignant and strange moments in the manga and in the first film is when he, as I recall, puts a sword and a ball on the floor for the little boy to pick from. And the strong implication is if the kid picks the ball, he's going to kill the kid, because the kid won't be up to the journey. It has the wrong instincts to survive the journey they're about to undertake. That's not in that's not in Western culture, that concept. And that comes so early that it is in fact a defining moment. But I was kind of fascinated by what Ed said about the Roger Moore surroundings, but you got Sean Connery in the middle of it,
Right. There you go.
right? You've got the more serious, yeah, and that's it. But the epic nature you're talking about, Ed, is you couldn't start out with those 500 people, but by the sixth movie, you're buying it because it just gets, it starts out as a smaller story and becomes an epic story, and it's and other thing I was going to mention to you, Ed, is very interested to hear what you said about Netflix, because I've thought often, and I'll see if you agree with this, but that whole era, starting with the VHS, with the mom and pop video stores, even pre-Blockbuster, when they first started putting VHS rentals out, there was sort of like really high end, Chinatown was out, and really the big time stuff. But then other people were putting out whatever they could get rights to, scrambling around foreign, indie, horror, lots of horror. And so all of a sudden, there were my generation and your generation, and mine was more through the VHS stores, yours was Netflix, because that TV eye got hungrier and hungrier, we got access to stuff that was amazing. And we just kept pouring it in, and I think we were very lucky. And I think streaming is somewhat similar. There's downsides to it because it turns us into niches. We're little groups instead of, used to be, there was more experiential stuff that, like, everybody saw the Beatles when they were on Ed Sullivan, but that kind of moment doesn't happen anymore that I can think of, unless it's a Super Bowl or something. But when you think about what you're doing to yourself, watching as much stuff as you could in a month because you wanted to milk your Netflix account, I mean, that's a wonderful thing. The education in film you inadvertently gave yourself. You were just trying to be a consumer. You were just trying to have a good time. You ended up knowing a lot about film.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, yeah. I've heard people recently joking about how it used to be like hard to listen to music that you would want to hear because you'd have to kind of sit by the radio and you'd have to press record at the right time, and now you can literally speak into the air. The speaker in the next room, if I talk to it, it would play any music I would ever want to hear to me instantly, conjured from space. So you're right that I think we're living in this era where you can get access to things, but there's so much to get access to that when can you do it? I mean, this is the first time I've known that I have access to the Lone Wolf and Cub TV show. Like, I've never heard of it being available in the West ever before. And if it was on Laserdisc, that was, before my time. So yeah,
there was a DVD release. There was a DVD release.
Yeah,
I believe you guys may have done it, but it was a long time ago. I mean, it was around the time they were releasing some of the Zatoichi TV stuff, which and it took a long time for the movies to come out, but it's amazing how much stuff is there that we just did not have access to, or had limited access to. These Asian directors that are really major that none of us had heard of now are not household names, but among film buffs, film buffs used to be all you knew was what's his name from Seven Samurai,
Kurosawa. Yeah,
Kurosawa. That was it.
Right.
Who's your favorite Japanese director? Well, Kurosawa.
Yeah.
Name number two. Well, I don't know any others. That's it.
Lone Wolf and Cub's been parodied by Bob's Burgers, and Jon Favreau said it's a big influence on The Mandalorian. And I guess for you, both of you guys, why do you think it's so influential that it keeps inspiring, other media?
What do you think, Ed?
I guess I didn't expect this to crop up in this conversation, but I guess parenthood is like a big piece of this story. And of course, I became a huge fan before I was ever a father. But you know, I wore my Lone Wolf and Cub T-shirt to the hospital the day my daughter was born. um, so I think there is a component of just the universal like father son dynamic that everyone can relate to in some way, and that makes it's. I mean, there's countless stories about parenthood, but there's very few stories about an assassin who is a parent, right? And so it takes like this relationship that's at the core of all of us, our relationship with our parents, and it adds this like genre twist that is completely unique. I mean, literally in the movies, pretty quickly. In the comics that I've read so far, I don't know that I've actually seen little Daigoro like murder someone, but Daigoro is murdering people in the movies for sure. And
Yeah.
there's this component to that that's like, so you've never seen it. You never see kids murdering in pop culture. You never really see that, and so it's shocking to see. And there's a cool factor in there for me as well, that it's just like if I have never really seen something before, I'm fascinated by that. So when you see this component of this little kid out on the road with his dad, I think some of those are why it's so enduring. Like, and that's the iconic image of season 1 of The Mandalorian is like, our hero with his little floating egg shaped, baby cart next to him. And that's just an iconic image that's instantly relatable to any parent or any kid. So I think that's part of it. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree 100%. Interestingly, with what you mentioned with Road to Perdition, that was probably the major disagreement that I had with the film, which is that in the graphic novel, uh, the young man, Michael Jr., does in fact about 2/3 of the way have to kill somebody, and the movie, in a very Hollywood way, goes out of its way to have him not kill anybody, and in fact have the Tom Hanks character, spoiler alert, not allow, kill the bad guy instead of him having the son kill the bad guy. Well, the son kills the bad guy, and there's a line in the film that says where the voiceover, which is the boy as a young man, the same age as he is in the film, saying he never touched a gun again. Well, trust me, he touched a gun again. Because I wrote Road to Purgatory after that, and I wrote Road to Paradise after that, and he touched a gun. All right, and but that's a kind of Hollywood thing, and I think they were afraid to go there, because I think one of the fascinating things about what you're talking about is this: is the father and son with a certain amount of tenderness, you know, bathing his son, in a stream, caring for his son, and around them, carnage. The juxtaposition of that is fascinating, and you see that a lot in popular culture, but it's usually a father. It's usually a father surrogate son. I mean, it's fairly common in film for there to be an older man and a younger man, and there's that kind of feeling in crime movies even. But to literally, have this guy is an assassin, and he's, like you say, he hires out to people, and he's not necessarily real careful about which side he's hiring out to. So it's dark. It's really dark, but it doesn't take away from the fact that there's this bond between the father and son, and there's something poignant, there's something troubling, and something wonderful about that.
The last question we have is it's more of a fun question, or maybe not. But
We've been having fun, haven't we?
oh no, I mean that this it's a kind of a lighthearted question. If a Hollywood remake has been, or a Hollywood remake's been in various stages of development for a while, should someone remake Lone Wolf and Cub today?
Well, they've actually done. There have been several less seen versions of it done in Japan, and I don't see any reason why it couldn't or shouldn't be done, because it's like saying, well, Laurence Olivier played Hamlet, so nobody should ever play Hamlet again. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous on the face of it. Uh, I would personally love to see. I know he's getting a little long in the tooth, but I'd love to see somebody like Chow Yun Fat you know, play that part. There's, of course, he's Chinese, but I definitely think it could happen. I think you might have some difficulty getting it made in our part of the world just because of the political climate right now. There'd be a lot of talk about what we were joking about, that this is the son. He's so young, and I don't know if that might be frowned upon. I mean, remember something that nobody really talks about, but uh, Battle Royale was a huge hit everywhere in the world, but here, because it wasn't allowed to be released. And then, of course, Hunger Games comes out a few years later and is basically Battle Royale. Just, you know, I mean, come on. If Word to Perdition is Lone Wolf and Cub, trust me, Hunger Games is, Battle Royale. But the idea that Battle Royale couldn't even be, which is a huge movie and a great movie, could be shown here. And the reason why specifically was, it really seems like ancient history now, but that's when the first major school shooting happened. They were going to release it, and then Columbine happened, and it didn't get released over here because obviously it's a story about sort of junior high kids shooting junior high kids. Well, we have problems, but the problem here is not what films we make or what films we watch. They're a little deeper than that, in my opinion. But I think that's possibly a practical reason why it wouldn't be made here. But maybe they can make it in Japan.
Yeah,
that's really where they should make it.
Yeah. So if the question's about an American remake, I question whether, American filmmakers would like get it, in a way. But I also just I'm thinking to myself, like, part of what made Road to Perdition really successful, or at least, I don't know about successful, but good to me, was, you actually infused some of the historic detail that the Japanese stories had to them. And so you brought an American historical, you brought in some American historical context,
Yeah.
and they were set in the past. So I don't know that there could be like a contemporary, like, maybe The Mandalorian works because it's this other galaxy. I don't know that you could take a modern American father and put him in today's culture and make a Lone Wolf and Cub story. But if you're adding in some historical context around that father son dynamic, maybe that's a secret sauce or a key, to this whole thing.
Well, what about a literal remake done in Japan today with, set in the past? I mean, really just shooting what they shot on the TV show and what they shot on the movies. But I mean, does that something you think would be possible, and maybe even, or would you just as soon keep hands off it?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm never extreme in terms of my thoughts on remakes. It's like I would never say, always remake everything, or never remake anything. I would never be in either of those camps, because, but there's things I question, like, well, why would you do that, or I guess, why would you Americanize it? Sometimes these something, a perfectly great movie comes out in a different language and it gets remade in English, and it seems like the only inspiration is
Right.
to make it in English. And those are often lackluster remakes. It seems like there needs to be an idea or an inspiration as to why to revisit, and but sure, I mean, I mean, it was the 70s when those films came out, and I'm sure there's, incredible filmmakers and in front of the camera talent that could crank out something incredible, but you'd want it to be inspired, I guess.
Well, the thing you're talking about where they do which is something that always kind of irritates me when they take something that's successful, let's say in France, and then they just do it here. They just sort of translate it and do it here as if the two cultures were identical.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. I mean, a man, you can't. How do you take Japan out of Lone Wolf and Cub? You know. Now, what I was trying to do, and again, it's not the only reference there, but I was trying to, you know, as you said, bring it into an American context, not try to make it like Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to make it, because the thing that I was fascinated by was just that notion about the similarity between, the Shogun's executioner and the Godfather's top enforcer. That parallel transcends, the country that it's from, and that's what, I love to do twists on things where I see something. There are, for example, I've never talked about this, but in a follow up I did to Road to Perdition, which was what you might call an in-betweenquel, where I showed the father and son on the road during the period that the movie covers. I had them tracked by some basically bounty hunters who were very much inspired by the three main characters in Cowboy Bebop, because I loved Cowboy Bebop, and I looked at them and I said that kind of idea would work well here, and it's probably more direct than Road to Perdition is, but nobody noticed it. But now I guess there's a Cowboy Bebop movie being made, so maybe people will come after me then. We'll see. But I do think looking at these things that are successful in other cultures, there's ways to draw from them without stealing from them. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's certainly what I've tried to do.
That makes me think of the film that just won the best international film at the Oscars. Another Round was just announced for an American remake with Leo DiCaprio, and I mean, we'll see what they do with it, but I know
we, as Ed says, you've always got to okay, let's see what you got. I mean, we don't judge it before we see it, I hope, but not the best idea.
We'll see. Alrighty, well I'm out of questions for you guys, so I really appreciate both of you joining tonight. It was a pleasure speaking with both of you.
Well, I had a good time, and Ed's very knowledgeable. It was fun to talk to him, and to you. Not that you're not knowledgeable, but you're throwing the questions.
Yeah, I'm throwing the questions.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
Tell me where your website is. I want to go to your website again. What is your website?
It's Synapse, but it's CINAPSE. And you can find me. I'm on Rotten Tomatoes as well.
What is the format there? Is it a film review
it's
format?
It's just reviews, which is kind of why I do this in my free time, because nobody wants to, read reviews and pay to read reviews or anything like that. So it's just something that I've done in my free time, and we've been doing that for, it's coming up on 8 years, but I've just been writing reviews for, a couple decades. There was a piece I wrote, I found it just before this in 2012, about the Lone Wolf Cub movies for that website Chud. That's I guess still around. Chud
Ah,
was big for me when I was younger, and I got the chance to write for them just that piece ages ago.
Ed, do you review strictly new release movies, or do you review
No, all
Blu-rays
over
and
the
so
yeah,
on?
yeah. We're big physical media junkies. Mostly are my team, so a lot of older stuff.
Oh,
I
good.
mostly review action movies, frankly, and you know, um, so little tiny new releases that nobody else is talking about, or classic stuff. Anything across the
Have
board.
you reviewed Nobody?
I saw Nobody. I haven't reviewed it. Yeah, it was my first movie back in theaters after getting vaccinated.
I loved it. I loved it. And there's and the new Jason Statham Guy
Yeah.
Ritchie. That was my first in
Okay.
a
Yeah.
theater.
I can't wait. I haven't been yet. I got to find the night that I can steal away to the theater and catch that one. I've been hearing good things.
Yeah, yeah, I loved it. Guys, thank you. I had a good time. I hope you did too.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the opportunity. It was great connecting.